Hey, Stoney here with another game of Mechabellum, and this is going to be another over-explained videos. Now, earlier this week, we talked about this new meta involving production war factory. So my friend and I decided to try it out and just to figure out what is the secret, what are some potential pitfalls that you can run into when you're running a war factory build. So let's jump right into it. At the bottom here, I am playing as a Rhino Specialist, and my opponent, I am Znard, is playing as a Giant Specialist. Now, first thing to note is that the Production War Factory, I think so far of the games that I've tried, I believe it works a little bit better in Standard than it is in Aggro. Production War Factory is sort of the opposite of the typical Battle War Factory, like the Corner War Factory we've seen a couple months ago, where when you want to use a corner war factory, your goal is to get the war factory in range, right? War factory has 4 guns, 2 of which will start shooting when they're in range, and then the 2 guns in the back will not actually shoot at the target that is currently shooting at unless the target moves towards it. So one of the issues with Battle Factory is that you're often not fully utilizing all 4 of its guns. So a good way to kind of counteract that is to, well, get a mobile beacon so your factory moves forward and start using all 4 of its guns. When it comes to production war factory, the idea is quite the opposite. In production war factory, you want to get the most value, not by dealing the most damage with all of your 4 guns, but rather you want to get the most of the value out of your unit by producing the most units. So in that case, the further back your war factories are, the longer it will most likely stay on the battlefield, and then the more unit it will produce. All right. And because we're playing standard, when we're picking units, we want to make sure that you pick the units that can support a standard board. Steel balls, fast moving units are probably not going to be very good for you, but line units such as sledgehammers, stormcrawlers, or range arclights are going to work very well into a standard board with war factory. So in this game, both of us are going with sledgehammers, and a bit of a spoiler, right? Because we kind of took turns playing War Factory, and this is the turn for Znard to actually go War Factory. All right, so we got round 3 unit drop here. I personally love Fire Badgers in a board with War Factory. I mean, I just like Fire Badgers in general. I think in a standard board, sometimes when you have Fire Badgers, you really mess up the targeting for your opponent's Stormcrawlers. And at the end, you can always sell your Fire Badgers. I mean, these triple Fire Badgers, they work really well in supporting a board like this. My opponent went for the level 3 Stormcrawlers. There might be a chance that he was just going to sell that off. He really doesn't need the additional damage, but Stormcrawler on a board is always good. Speaking of War Factory, so a trick for a standard Sacco War Factory is actually have War Factory on round 4. So way you do it is you save 400 on round 3, and at round 4 you will get 800 for your supply, and then you're going to buy a War Factory, and you will have 200 left over. So 400 plus 800 is 1200, and then you buy a War Factory, you got 200 left over, and then that 200 you will spend buying efficient maintenance. Now in this case, Znard is actually doing it a little bit differently. He started doing a earlier War Factory at round 3. The risk of doing earlier War Factory is, of course, your opponent will have time to react to it, and of course doing it at round 3, you'll have to take a loan. Because round 3, you start with, what, 600? And assuming you have some money left over, or if you're selling things, you may be able to achieve that. So in this case, I am Znard actually sold his level 3 Stormcrawlers, which will give him an extra 400 supply. And then he took a loan, and then he got the War Factory. Right? So it's a bit risky, but it's still doable. Personally, I think the tempo and just the econ progression works a little bit smoother at round 4, but you can always do it at round 3. The earlier you do it, the less likely your opponents are going to react, and of course there's going to be less units on the board, so you have a higher chance of just clearing out everything. Now, just following the standard Sacco War Factory, so what happened is at round 4, you get War Factory with efficient maintenance. At round 5, if you can get a second War Factory, then do it. Sometimes you need to have a unit drop to get that second War Factory, because at round 5, you want to do 2 things. The first thing you want to do is you want to get Steel Ball production, which costs 450 after you're taking that first technology. Round 5, you start off with 1,000 extra supplies, so minus 450, you end up with 550. And if you take a loan, that 750 is not enough for you to get a second War Factory right away. So chances are you might have to sell something. And if you do, then you will end up with 2 War Factories with Steel Ball production. Steel Ball production can reasonably defend things like Melter without multi-beam. For Scorpions at round 5, you can also reasonably expect those War Factory to be okay, because a Scorpion simply, like a single Scorpion, would not be able to bring down the War Factory, and of course they would need to have acid, so that's just a lot of expense, right? And this brings me to another interesting point. I think the Rhino spec is actually pretty darn good if you're running into a War Factory build, because Rhino at level 2 will actually give you 300. So, well, Rhino at level 2, it will give you 300 resource, and of course minus the cost that you would spend on unlocking field recovery, so a net 200, and that's a pretty big boost, assuming you don't get any other unit drop in that time. Quick supply is always good as well. You can save that 200 for the first couple turns. So these are all good options. So it's not just restricted to, you know, like a giant spec, and of course giant spec you just unlock it for free. All right, Snart is doing things a little bit differently in this round. So first of all, he's going for early War Factory. And secondly, he's actually delaying that second War Factory, at least for now, in favor of a little bit more chaff and also a oil on the ground. Now, the oil is taken not from the tower, but it is taken from the card drop earlier. And because of the repositioning, it's allowing him to keep that tempo for 1 round higher. And now he's got a level 2 War Factory. Now, the good thing of not deploying a second War Factory is, of course, you don't have to pay the tax. This War Factory with efficient maintenance still costs extra 50 every single round. So by keeping 1 and getting it to level 2, you can still reasonably delete everything on the board here. I did take a single Scorpion with acid, along with a few more chaff. And as a defender, in this round, the plan is to get Scorpions with acid to deal with that. Level 2 War Factory is extremely strong. I think even with the Scorpion, even with the acid, I mean, it's just one-shots a Scorpion, so it's really no answer to that yet. In order for me to properly contest this War Factory, I will need to have Scorpion with range. And that's not going to happen until a few rounds later. Alright. Enhancement module is always a fun unit to have. You can always just drop it on sledgehammers, drop it on Scorpions, and then sell them to make a little bit more money. I think for my board, eventually I just want to have as many Scorpions as I possibly can. So I started just selling things and start putting down extra Scorpions. Instead of getting range, I actually wanted to get siege first. So why siege instead of just straight up range, right? I think the reason for siege and why siege might be slightly better here is because you're not really in a hurry to kill whatever unit is in front of the War Factory, but you are in a hurry to get that lump of acid as far into the War Factory as you possibly can. Now, with range, you actually like the range plasma ball is actually a tracking projectile, I think. Now, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think whatever the Scorpion is shooting at, that projectile will actually reach that particular destination, or at the very least, because of how fast it travels, it rarely not hit its intended target. With Siege, the projectile actually travels a lot slower, but with a longer reach. So what ends up happening is, when this Scorpion, so assuming like the WARFACTORY is like right over here, right? When the Scorpion shoots the asset at the WARFACTORY, with Siege, it actually has a better chance of getting that asset onto the WARFACTORY because it will shoot a little bit closer, as the WARFACTORY are usually moving forward. Whereas if you get range, your asset will be a little bit further, and you just want that WARFACTORY to be bathed in asset as early as you possibly can. Now, when you're playing Siege Scorpion, it's very important to make sure that you have an even spread. Very often when you're playing a WARFACTORY strategy, you'll see players reposition, and WARFACTORY is probably the most efficient repositioning unit you could possibly get. That is simply because every time you move a WARFACTORY, either with the repositioning card or simply by selling it, you're moving 800 supplies worth of combat effectiveness. So yeah, you just, it doesn't get better than that. So if you want to have a shock trooper style of playing reposition games, WARFACTORY is your best unit. And this is why corner WARFACTORY was so effective, because every time you shift a corner WARFACTORY from one to the other or to the middle, your opponent will have to move multiple units in order to defend that, and it's just not possible. Alright, Siege Scorpion is trying his best, but at level 2, this is a really powerful unit. I mean, I almost got it, but not quite. EM is a great card whenever you see WARFACTORY, whether it's production WARFACTORY or just battle WARFACTORY, because it's going to run a lot of technology, and if you can disable that, even for that first 25 seconds, it's going to be worth it. EM is also taken by my opponent here onto the Scorpion, and instead of getting more unit, I've decided to just triple tech the Scorpion, double shot with acid with Siege, ensure that wherever the Scorpion's attack lands is going to deal a tremendous amount of damage. And down the line, what I wanted to do is just to add even more Scorpions. But here's the danger. Whenever you're playing battle WARFACTORYs, this strategy may work. But when you're playing production WARFACTORY, your end game is not so much killing the WARFACTORY. I mean, yes, you eventually have to kill the WARFACTORY. The hardest part is actually killing the chaff that these WARFACTORYs produce. So we're in round 6, and my opponent has taken 2 additional techs. So he's got steel balls, and he's got phoenixes. The best setup for WARFACTORY is to have mechanical division on steel balls, so that when a steel ball dies, it will continue to produce 5 more crawlers. And then you want to have EM on the phoenixes. Now in this case, Snart doesn't actually run EM, so these WARFACTORYs are actually more susceptible to a multi-melter. Multi-melters deals well with the steel balls. It also works well into these WARFACTORYs. Now, EM is the single technology that completely counters multi-melter and just make it unplayable. You could try to play it if you can win a few tempo rounds and maybe end the game before it gets overwhelmed, but in general, like the EM on the Phoenix is just very powerful. A very unfortunate round for me here. Don't have enough chaff, don't have enough chaff clear, and I was once again being beaten by this WARFACTORY. Alright, we got unit drop here. Steel balls are amazing. Vulcan is also pretty good. Vulcan, while they may not be able to clear these steel balls effectively, but they can certainly help with the rest of the chaff. My opponent took steel balls. I think partially, yeah, there's the mech div, so he doesn't have to unlock steel balls himself. And also level 2 steel balls on their own are just super annoying. So you tuck them away in the back, right? And they're just gonna go and tank a lot of damage. But we're into round 7, which means there are actually quite a lot of money to spend. So far, there hasn't been any repositioning yet. Right now, it's just a pretty standard game with war factories. After this game, I'll show you another one in the same video where war factory is being played a little bit more aggressively, because this is like, if you, in order for you to make the strategy work, you really have to know how to, one is to, of course, build a well-rounded board, but two is how to use repositioning with the war factory. But so far, it has just been the initial repositioning. He does have the card, so I do expect this to happen in the later rounds. Oh, speaking of the devil, there it is. He just wants to get the war factory a little bit forward. He may be a little disappointed knowing that there's acid on oil on the ground here. All right, I probably would need a few more scorpions. So now I'm up to a total of 4, so there will be plenty of acid on the ground here. However, also a lot of chaff here. Do not have range on this Vulcan yet, which means this Vulcan is just going to walk a little bit too forward and is going to get targeted. Scorpion is still trying his hardest. And there it is, the first shot onto this level 2 war factory. Let's get a few more shots. And down goes the war factory, but oh, this marksman is actually doing well. On the far right, double shot onto the war factory. And there it goes. So if you're the war factory player, this is a very scary kind of round, right? Because your opponent has just gotten enough units with enough technology to essentially defeat your war factory. Assault Scorpion gets picked. I think Assault with Siege is like a match made in heavens. It's just so good. The biggest problem with Siege Scorp is damage output, and Assault, you will sacrifice 20 meters of your, or 30 meters of your range, but in exchange you'll get about 30% increase in your shooting speed. So it's a pretty good deal if you're using Assault Scorp with Siege. And recently the buff of the Siege mode, I think it was from what, 80 meters up to 100 meters, is helping you to take the Assault Scorp card even easier. And here comes the repositioning. Triple War Factory on the same side. So earlier I mentioned how, you know, when you lose a round like that, you feel like a sinking feeling in your stomach. But you shouldn't, because War Factory has a critical mass, and that number is 4. After 4 War Factories, it becomes very difficult for your opponent to adequately deal with everything. So why is 4 the magic number? Well, with 4 War Factories, right, it's producing 4 steel balls every 6.5 seconds for 11 seconds. So that's a total of 44 steel balls. If you're producing phoenixes, right, 6 times each times 4, that's 24 phoenixes. That's how many more units that your opponent will have to kill in order to get through or even to the War Factory. Now, I am still doing well here, right? Double acid is excellent, but you can already tell when you have War Factories positioned just to focus on one side, I do not have enough chaff clear to adequately clear 4 War Factories of production. I mean, this is not even 4, this is 3 War Factories, and I was still not able to break through on that side. There's still 2 War Factories left over. So whenever your opponent is beating you that way, use repositioning and clumps your War Factory together, and they will clear a path with just the sheer number of steel balls and phoenixes. All right, we're getting into round 9 here. Electromag is offered. It's a must-take card in this sort of field because you know your opponent's going to put down shields. And if he doesn't, he's going to lose everything on his War Factory. A good strategy when you're playing against this sort of board is to have a single melter in front of where you expect your opponent's shield is going to be. If your opponent's is really good, he's going to put shield and a unit of chaff at the front. But if it isn't that good, he's just going to put shield. And your melter with EM barrage can actually pop the shield before the real EM hits onto the War Factory. So imagine if these 3 War Factories are completely disabled. Right? That would be a huge problem. Now, surprisingly, Znark decided to sell his level 3 War Factory, but instead with the additional money, buying 3 more War Factory to a total of 5. So earlier we said if 4 War Factories a pain in the ass to deal with, imagine 5 War Factories at round 9, each producing 11 steel balls and 6 phoenixes, and that is like an entire board of units. Like 11 steel balls, 6 phoenixes is just your standard board at round 9, right? And this is War Factories producing them, and he even leveled one of them with into level 2. So a very difficult board to deal with. And there's also the EM and of course the ion beam, and that is going to suffocate my side of the board, and there's just a stream of units. Once you get to this point, right, once your units are no longer chaff clearing the steel balls, your game is pretty much lost, because what's your next option? More scorpions? No amount of scorpions are going to scale as well as these War Factories. So that is where you know that your game is lost. All right, so stick around. We are going to jump into game number 2. After we'll just finish watching me getting completely destroyed here by these War Factories. All right, let's jump into game number 2. All right, welcome back. We're in game number 2, and at the bottom here, I am playing as a quick supply specialist, and I am also against Znart, playing as a fortified specialist. And this time, I'm the one going War Factory, and Znart is going to have to defend. So earlier, we looked at a game where I tried to defend the War Factory with Siege Scorpions. You can absolutely defend against that, but there is a critical number of War Factory, a number of 4, that you simply cannot allow your opponent to get to. Because once they hit to that, once they hit that number, all of a sudden your Scorpion simply cannot scale. It's the same situation where you're running into carry sledgehammers into Vulcan, right? The critical number for Vulcan is 3 level 2 Vulcans or 5 level 1 Vulcans with range. Now, once you get to that level, your sledgehammers will just melt so quickly, and you're just unable to win back no matter how much you do. All right, round 1 is pretty standard. We have Stormcallers going into spiders. So let's talk about the defender. Well, no, let's not defender. Let's talk about the War Factory enjoyer, since I'm the War Factory enjoyer in this game. Whenever you're playing War Factory, you need to know that if you want to get War Factory by round 4, you have to save 400 by round 3, which means your first 3 rounds are going to be a little bit underwhelming. Your goal is not to win the first 3 rounds, but rather your goal is to minimize the amount of damage that you take in this first 3 rounds. Now, of course, you can always try cheeky stuff. For example, you can put Wasp here with Mobile Beacon. You can take the Phoenix on the back with Mobile Beacon. Lots of things with Mobile Beacon. But fundamentally, you want to make sure that you don't take that much damage, because if you do, then your opponent will have a very small, you'll have a very small window to make sure you stabilize with WARFACTORY. And if your opponent is smart about it and just puts down additional scorpions with acid early on, then you may lose the game before you can come online, right? Stormcallers are a great unit if you want to just stay alive and minimize damage. Stormcaller may not win you every single game, but they can certainly take a lot of your enemy with them. The Rhino was a good pick. Sonar realizes that I need to have tempo in the early round, so he picked the biggest tempo unit, which is level 2 Rhino. Alright, we're getting into round 3. It's a skip for both of us because the cards themselves really aren't that interesting at this level. I started with, I believe I started with 750 and a skip. I end up with 800. Bought a single squad of fans here just to stall this Rhino a little bit. Second squad, Crawler right here. Mobile Beacon, and then Drill. Why Drill at this point? What? The first reason I want to take Drill is because I want to do cheeky stuff like this one. And I also want to make sure that my opponent is on his feet. So Drill actually is very cheap now. So Drill only costs, I think, is 100 on this Crawler. So very useful technology. You get tower super fast, and you also are able to defend against your flanks. You're forcing your opponent to either take Drill and win those fights, or simply ignore, in which case you actually get a slight edge by having a few more Crawlers left over. My game plan at this point is to survive this round, hopefully win this round, and then next round we're going to start with the War Factories. All right, not bad. Actually winning the round here. Round 4, efficient tech is offered and is an instant pick if you're doing this sort of build. You know you're going to get at least 3 technology on the WARFACTORY alone. So what that means is you're definitely going to get your money back with the efficient tech. Now with the WARFACTORY, I find both Arclights and Mustangs can work well as your primary chapter. I personally prefer the Arclights a little bit more than Mustangs, simply because it has a longer range and is able to survive behind the WARFACTORY for a bit longer. Whereas the Mustangs, even with range, they tend to just run forward a little bit too fast, and then by the time you need them for tanking, or you just need late round chaff clear, they're already dead. But not the case with Arclight. They tend to survive quite a lot longer. Another great addition to chaff clear like Arclights or Mustangs is Stormcallers. Stormcallers later on, you can take fire. Because you're producing steel balls and phoenixes, those units don't typically die to fire that quickly, so your fire actually work more towards your benefit. So round 4, first WARFACTORY, and then you take efficient maintenance, a total of 1200 supplies. And of course, to a usual opponent, or even this stage of the meta, people are going to be very surprised by this WARFACTORY, and that's okay. And you're almost guaranteed to win this round. If you don't win this round, then chances are you're going to have a slightly more difficult uphill battle. It's not unwinnable by any means, just slightly awkward. All right, round 2, you know your opponents are going to have a very strong answer. For me, I don't need anything. I just need to make sure that my tech are all in alignment. So in this case, the steel balls are great. The saber tooth is good for selling. I took the steel balls and I sold one of them and took the tech on it. I think it's a worthy example. It's a worthy investment. Because I have some steel balls, and I look at my opponent, and he's got marksman, he's got tarantula, and I just figure, you don't really, like, my steel balls aren't really going to do much in here with so many heavy ground, especially level 1 steel balls, right? Your level 2 tarantula can cure very quickly, level 2 marksman can cure very quickly. So I wonder, instead of getting a lot of steel balls, maybe I'll just go with the phoenixes first and use my war factory as the primary tank. My opponent decided to get a melting point, so instead of acid scorpions, it's going to be melting point. Level 2 steel balls on the far right being super annoying. Melting point can work if they can lock on. And in this case, my opponent actually got really lucky because I didn't get steel ball production. The steel ball production is a very anti-melting point technology, especially if you get mech div on the steel balls. So if you're playing Battle Warfactory, this is the time where you start to sweat, right? Battle Warfactory are the ones where you take range and launcher overload. Yeah, nothing's good here for my opponent. I think additional deployment might be better, but instead it's going to be shield. So if you're going Battle Warfactories and you see range melting point locking onto you so quickly, you know that the next round he's either going to put more melting point or just a lot of missiles and a lot of chaff gear, because all melting point needs is that split second to lock on and your war factory would have been dead. But since I am not running Battle War Factory, I can afford to do this sort of stuff. So I don't mind if the melting point might be locking onto me earlier, but it's not going to lock onto my war factory. It's going to lock onto the steel balls that come out of the war factory. So at round 6, that's going to be double war factory with steel ball and with phoenix production. All right, so what can my opponent do at this point? The melting point is already down, so you know that's the unit of choice that he wants to use for against War Factory. EM is being picked. Good card, because EM has a pretty significant splash. So even if the steel ball just coming out of the War Factory, the splash will still disable the War Factory, which is not great. By putting 2 War Factory together, you're effectively creating this death ball effect, right? There's just too many guns and too much damage shooting at your opponent. And because you're running production War Factory, you actually prefer to run back to the other side, because that just means you have so many more units. All right, lots of good cards. I think advanced targeting system might be interesting, but it is very expensive. Remember, if you're the War Factory player, you want to get your total number of War Factories to 4. Once you hit 4, it becomes very challenging for your opponent to actually defeat that. All right, Zart. Oh man, this is a very bold move. At round 7, instead of getting a lot of melting points, he simply decided to quadruple tech his melting point. Now, I think everything here is good against the War Factory, but specifically if you want to play into a War Factory with steel ball production, you need to have multi-beam. Without multi-beam, your melter will probably be stuck at shooting at steel balls forever. Now, for me, I know there's going to be a stronger response here. I just don't know how he's going to position those melting point. I was expecting them maybe just one further back instead of one being on the side, which is very much a possibility. And what I wanted to do is to hit on the far right and putting oil on the far left so that his units will get stuck on the oil and I would take care of the tower, and then I would swing over, take care of the other tower and the rest of the army. With war factories, one other perk of war factory that people don't often realize is that each one of these units deal 550 damage to your health. So what that means is as long as you keep these war factories alive, plus a few of these production, I think they take about 50% of your regular damage to your HP. So like a Phoenix, instead of dealing 200, I think they deal half of that, but still significant. And then you should be able to win the game in just a few rounds. And in here, because I was able to get tower with a surprise central placed war factory, my opponent is going to lose the rest of his army. And with so many units produced, that is going to be a very devastating round. Oh. Personally, I do not like to use multi-melter into production war factory. I just think there's just too many counters against the multi-melter. For one, MacDiv on steel balls is an excellent counter. The melter will have to deal with the steel balls, and after the steel ball dies, 5 more crawlers pops out, distracting the melter even more. And when they're done with those crawlers, more steel balls comes out of the war factory. Right, so it's a never-ending cycle. And another thing is if you're running steel ball and Phoenix, EM is really deadly. EM essentially shuts down all 4 of your technologies, and then your melter can't even clear these steel balls. All right, so far we look at a defense using Siege Scorpion or any sort of Scorpion as long as it's got acid, and another attempt with multi-melter. And we're going to jump into game 3. We're going to see if there's going to be another way to defend against production war factory. All right, welcome to game 3. So at the bottom here, I am playing as a marksman specialist, and I am up against Yes Win Big. The MMR of this game, I think, is around like 2200. And because I know I want to go War Factory, I decided to choose very standard units, crawlers and stormcallers. And my opponent's also playing standard here with sledgehammers and marksmen. Alright, round 1. Ashley got pretty lucky with the Stormcallers and just the chaff instead of Arclights. Round 2, nothing here is really interesting, so I decided to skip. And it's going to be a skip for my opponent as well. I am Marksman Specialist, which means I get the Orange Man in round 2. Not that I really need the Orange Man, I expect to sell eventually. Two Arclight went down. I think this is just very standard board development, right? Arclight, more fans at the front, so everything fights in unison. Next round, I might want to put Arclight here, more fans here, and then eventually I want to fill those corners with crawlers, and if I need to, put some crawlers and Arclight in the back, just stall my opponent's chaff. So this is usually how you develop a standard board, regardless what you choose in the end, whether it's going to be Fortress, Vulcans, Melting Points, Boats, or War Factory. All right, lots of sledgehammers. Sledgehammers are decent. You have the opportunity to always go carry sledges. And of course, you can use sledges purely as chaff as they are quite tanky. Round 3, we got unit drop. Typhoon is a great unit. You move them alongside with the WARFACTORY, and all of a sudden you have some pretty beefy units to tank and also some pretty decent chaff there. And not to mention, it also shoots air. My opponent is also putting on Typhoon, which I find a little strange. I feel like there are sledgehammers, and if I were him, I'll probably just go harder into sledgehammers. There was also a Scorpion in the drop, so if I picked the Scorpion would have been great against sledges and also excellent against Typhoons. And that brings us to round 4, the WARFACTORY round. So if you notice, I did save quite a bit of money in round 3. And if you didn't notice, you can always go back. At round 4, I have 1,200. And I was able to buy a WARFACTORY efficient maintenance and end up with 0 supply. Alright, round 4 is going to be a level 2 Rhino round for my opponent. The Rhino is going to be tucked away in the back here. WARFACTORY on the right. All right, so round 4 WARFACTORY did exactly what it's supposed to do. None of these cards are quite interesting. I guess deployment module, if you want to deploy your Rhino around a little bit. For me, I think I just want to shift a unit position for this Typhoon. I really like the Typhoon, but I didn't want to get stuck on whatever was happening on this side. And here's what's very interesting. So instead of using Scorpions or Melters, my opponent decided to just bring out a WARFACTORY of his own. Alright, let's see here. So I'm going production WARFACTORY, and my opponent decided to go with range, which means he's gearing up for range and launcher overload. And what happened when that is the case is that his WARFACTORY is going to outlevel my WARFACTORY. Because my whatever unit that I summon, the steel balls or the phoenixes, when they kill something, they do not actually contribute to experience to the WARFACTORY. But if you're the opponent and you're shooting my steel balls and my units, and because you have range, you'll probably shoot my WARFACTORY and kill it too, you're going to outlevel my WARFACTORY. And that becomes an issue because earlier on when you're the same level is fine. But when you're a couple levels ahead of me and you have launcher overload, you're able to clear out chaff so quickly that there's just no way or very little way for my production WARFACTORY ever catch up. So before I play this game, I never really considered this route, and now that I've seen it, I was in a bit of panic. I was like, okay, what do I do here? Do I continue with the WARFACTORY production? Do I trust in the magic number of 4? Or do I start to pivot into something else? Whenever you see a big scary unit, just know that the big unit is scary because it had technology. Right? And with that in mind, I've decided to take even stronger chaff clear in the case of these ranged Vulcans. I feel like at this point, the Arclights might have outlived its usefulness. And Vulcan actually come at the right time because I haven't really teched the Arclights, which means I haven't really wasted that money. So how do I disable the technology of a big scary unit? Luckily, I have Phoenixes, which is something that I'm going to go next turn. In this round, I just need to build up my line a little bit better. There were always going to be EM Stormcallers, and of course, when all of that fails, I can always try to build battle factories of my own, though they will be a lot more expensive because of the technologies that I've already chosen. So, and a tax you have to pay on these technologies. Alright, both war factories are doing amazing, but unfortunately, once again, we have his war factory locking onto my war factory, while my war factory simply does not have the range nor chaff clear to deal with his war factory. So it's not everything is about this big unit. Sometimes whatever's supporting it is equally as important. Now, luckily, on the far right, I do have a level 2 war factory that is producing level 2 steel balls, which means I still have a very good chance to get through his other war factory. Oof. Another big round here. And I'm one more step closer to that 4 war factory magic number. Alright, took intensive training because I know that his war factory might just outlevel mine because he can kill my lord faster. And here with launcher overload, 2 level 2 war factories should have no problem dealing with my production war factory. So I have to get something going. Alright, spend the money on leveling my war factories. Now, one thing I noticed from my opponent is that he did not take efficient maintenance on yet, which means he's had these 2 war factories in 2 rounds and 1 war factory for a single round, and every time a war factory survives, they have to pay 200 supplies of maintenance. So that is what, 5 times 2, 1,000 supply worth of maintenance so far. However, he is beating me with just sheer firepower. Like, the amount of output for a level 2 war factory with launcher is just insane. You see how quickly my war factory falls, and the implication of that is now this one is now level 3 and the other one is also level 3. And if I couldn't beat it when they were level 2, how do you expect me to beat it when they're level 3? And here comes the Phoenix. So fully aware that the power of these war factories comes from their technology. So I wanted to get the Phoenixes out and to disable the technology. But I made a critical mistake. I miscalculated my math by about 50. So by the time I bought the Phoenixes out, I only had 150 supply left with loan, and I was not able to buy EM. I was so upset about this round. If I had EM, I could have probably won right here and now. So I will be able to stop, most importantly, launcher overload, and that forces the war factory to shoot steel balls instead of my unit. But yeah, it's too bad that I didn't have EM. And this is where things get really scary, because remember those level 3 war factories not long ago? Well, they're about to become level 4s. Alright, we're getting into round 9. We got another unit drop. Big saber for me. Scorpion is also a wonderful option, but when you have, yeah, I guess Scorpion will actually not be too bad. I was gonna say when you have range and overload, your Scorpion just don't live that long. You can always take the Scorpion and just get them siege and ass and put them behind the tower. If your opponent got your tower, you're dead anyways, so your Scorpion don't really matter. And if they don't get your tower, then your Scorpion will always have a chance to fire that last acid ball. Alright, additional war factories being added in, and now I have full tech. Still aren't at the magic number of 4s because I wanted to level my war factories. At least I can tank a few more shots into these level 3, soon to be level 4 juggernauts. And my opponent also puts down his 3rd war factory, but his will be at level 1. Alright, let's take a look at the technologies once you start pumping them out. One thing I wanted to catch up on is range. So I do outrange my opponent by 20 meters. Well, I don't shoot as fast, but I can just outrange him for a bit. Alright, getting the middle war factory. Now we have 2 war factories on a single level 3. And it's just so freaking tanky. It is simply refusing to die with this 500,000 HP. And it's the same situation on the other side. We actually have a level 3 steel balls onto my war factory. Now, fortunately, I think my EM is working, which means now not only he will have to walk closer, when he does, he will not have the firepower to kill my war factory, but of course with the tower debuff he will. Alright, this war factory is almost dead. I still have my level 2 war factory, and I wonder if I can seal the deal right now. Whoa, 20 HP, almost got him. Alright, advanced targeting I think is critical here. We're essentially in a big war factory fight. Neither of us are probably going to buy anything other than war factory and maybe some chaff, but at this point I would highly recommend just to start sell chaff out, and which he is doing, right? He's selling the typhoons, because with so many production technology active, you really just don't need chaff. You just need more war factories. One problem with both of our board is mass anti-air, so if you can disable your phoenixes a little bit longer, then you should be able to deal with that. Now, last round I wasn't too happy with the Phoenix EM. I mean, it eventually kicked in and eventually helped me win the game, but it just kicked in a little bit too slow. So I've decided to add another layer of EM in the form of stone callers, and they can also clear the sledgehammers fairly reliably. Now let's take a look at range, right? So right now my range is at 150, and my opponent at 115, and this is with tech disabled. Without tech disabled at 135. Alright, war factories are moving in. Now, my side war factories are both now level 3, which means they should be at the same level as my opponent. And I do have a slightly higher level war factory in the middle. But the problem though is I am going to lose tower, and once I lose tower... Oh, terrible tower timing. There's going to be 4 war factory gunning down on me, and eventually, I think this is lethal, winning the game. So very interesting game using a battle war factory against a production war factory. I think the overload really helped out a ton. And also, in general, I think my opponent simply has more chaff than I do, right? Because all of these sledgehammers will just become chaff in the later rounds. And for me, I don't actually have them, and my Vulcans do not tank that much into these level 3 war factories. Now, I do want to try... So there's 2 ideas that we can potentially try here. The first idea is, what if I also took launcher overload. And then the second idea, so instead of getting EM on the Stonecrawlers and stuff like that, we just take launcher overload. And then the second idea might be, what if I take melting point with range and just put them behind the war factories? So maybe let's test. Well, let's jump in and let's just see how much money we actually have and to see if it actually makes sense to go with that way. All right, so we're going to skip advanced targeting system. We have 1600, so we can go both options. In this case, let me just go with launcher overload. If you're going with launcher overload, you don't really need chaff clear anymore, do you? And if you don't need chaff clear, I think it's safe to sell a Vulcan. All right, we're going to add another war factory right here. Of course, we're going to take temp range. We're not going to take temp speed simply because we don't really need them to run that fast. We just need them to, you know, reduce. I don't have level 3 war factories if I do it this way, and that is a problem. But let's see. Okay, so in the middle, we're doing all right. But we're losing the fight on the side simply because my opponent's war factory out-level mine. Gonna get tower, which means he's going to have these 3 war factory left over, which means I still lose. All right, so we're going to try this one more time, but this time we're going to use melters. All right, so let's try this one more time with melters. And see if this is enough. Okay, don't need any of these. We're going to skip. And we're just going to go melters, right? Let's do another melter. We'll take temp range. Maybe missile, get rid of the front crawler. Alright, melter getting onto a lot of chaff as expected. Okay, still locking onto phoenixes. Melters on the left are still also not locking on the proper unit. Getting onto phoenixes. Finally getting onto the right unit, but I think it's just too late. We'll see. It's doing a lot of damage though. Oh, it's actually able to bring that one down. On the right hand side, tower's gonna get taken. A little bit better than if you just straight up go launcher overload, but still not quite enough. So a very good game, a very good tempo in the final round. All right. So I know this is a bit of a longer video than usual, but there's a lot to learn, and I think this could be a very powerful meta until Bear like nerfs the War Factory once again. So what did we learn? Well, the key point of this build is, one, you want to play this build in standard. Ideally, you want to have arc lights, or Mustangs and Stonecallers on top of other chaff units. Later on, you can certainly upgrade to Vulcan. At round 3, you want to save 400 so that at round 4, you'll be able to buy a War Factory without having to sell any units. But if you are planning on selling units, you just have to plan accordingly. At round 5, typically I like to do 2 War Factories and take a loan for steel ball production. And then at round 6, it's going to be Phoenix production. And then at round 7, it's going to be more War Factories. And you want to get to a total of 4 War Factories with production because it's just so hard to kill. Unless you're also running into 4 War Factories of your opponent, right? So give it a try. Let me know in the comments how you did. And also let me know what is your favorite way to play this type of game. All right. I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you want to see another one just like this, here's a video for you. And I will see you on the next one.
Prepare your tactics. Mechabellum's calling. Deploy your fortress. The battlefield's alive with swarms.